All right. Thank you, Molly. So my name is Scott Cochran. I'm the director for Madison Youth and Family Services, and must say very proud and grateful to have this time with you all this evening. We represent Madison Youth and Family Services, which you have, the folks you have on your screen represent our panelists, who I will introduce in a moment. Also, you'll see Catherine Barden, who is our Assistant Director for Community Support, as well as our fearless Molly Fahey, who is going to be hosting our Zoom tonight. So we welcome you and we say thank you for being here. A special welcome to really all the community members, parents, adults, youth that are watching tonight. A special thanks to our community partners. So that includes the school system. We know that we have folks joining us from the area churches, from the library. And again, thank you for being here. Also, a special recognition to our school partners, Dr. Cook, Terry, among some of our school partners who are in the audience tonight. I want to say thanks to our Madison Youth and Family Services board members who are also attending tonight. We have, we'll point out a couple of elected officials. So joining us is State Senator Christine Cohen, our Representative John Michael Parker, and our first elect woman for Madison, Peggy Lyons. We also know that we have quite a few members of our local boards, so the Board of Education, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and we know a number of you registered to be here tonight. And we do believe, I haven't looked at the participant list, but we do believe there's a lot of you here, and would invite you, if you'd like, to put your name and a little wave in the chat so the community can see that you are attending and you're a part of this evening's discussion. And again, appreciate you being here. At this point, I think you want to start, well, before we queue up the presentation, hold on one second. I want to just talk in terms about the structure of tonight. We do have a lot of material to go through. We think we can do it in about an hour. We're going to ask people to hold questions until the very end. You can ask a question by raising your hand at that time, and Molly will promote you into the webinar and you can ask your question. I don't believe that your face will be on screen. You can also put a question into the Q&A on the Q&A portion of the Zoom. It's okay if you put things in chat. If you're going to put something in chat, probably the best thing might be something if you wanted to point it out or say hey to one of our great students. Questions and answers are probably, Q&A is probably best to put in that Q&A slot so we can keep all that organized and make sure we get to as many questions as we can. But please just hold everything to the end and so we can get through all of the material. And want to point out that there will be things that we know people want to ask more in depth around, and with tonight's presentation, we're going to be giving a lot of information. And so like bringing things up, and we may get some discussion going. We may try even at the end of this to touch on things, follow up on questions, but like we won't be able to get too far in depth on any one particular issue or question just for the sake of time. But we do, if there are other things for people to talk about, there will be opportunities going forward in the future for folks to get more involved or follow up with questions that they may have. All right, so we want to get going on the PowerPoint. All right, folks, so here we go. So this presentation tonight, this is really what we refer to as our State of Youth report. It's based primarily on the outcome of our 2021 high school survey that was done last October. You can go to the next slide, Catherine. The presenters tonight, as I've introduced myself already, Catherine Barden, who will be picking up the slideshow in a couple more slides. Want to introduce our wonderful student panel. And I would say, like, if there were a Justice League of superhero Daniel Hand students, it would be comprised of these folks. Becca Snyder, Bridget O'Keefe, Darian McMahon, each way, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm doing this a little fast. I don't mean to. Evan Massapertisto, Katie Biner, and Review Wall. So they'll be commenting on specific slides when we get to them, and will also be available for people at the end of the show. So just in terms of the survey itself, we've been doing this for a number of years, and just it's important for everyone to know too that the survey is not the only sole source of information that we have on how our youth are growing up, or the environment in which they're growing up in. We run a number of programs and services. We are very involved both in mental health, social services, and a number of prevention and positive youth development programming. So we have staff that are primarily stationed in and around schools. We are running groups. So there's many of us who work here also live here or live nearby. So we are privy to a lot of information constantly about what kind of things are impacting our youth, and then working very hard to address things and create a very supportive environment in which to live in and hopefully to enjoy. The survey is one really key piece of that input, because it's something that we can track. It's very specific. It's research based, and glad that now that we have quite a bit of data in doing these surveys over a number of years, so we can actually, and you'll see, track things back quite a bit. This particular year was 160 questions. That was a part of the main survey, the developmental asset survey that we do each year. We also had another 20 questions that we created in an addendum. And the addendum really was written by us based on the questions that we knew were coming directly from the students. So those are questions that involved indications of sexual harassment, sexual assault, things like that were not covered in the main survey. What's important to point out on the survey is that they are done now online. For the longest time, they were paper. The last 2 survey years, so this year and in 2019, we had to do an online version of the survey. And what we found when we did this in 2019 was that students were concerned about their the security of their input to those surveys because they were being done online. So as we came into this year, we talked with a number of students, and we made a very concerted effort to address the privacy concerns. And I think we also wanted to let the students know a little bit more about what the survey was and why we do it. To that end, you can go to the next slide, Catherine. To that end, there was we worked with some students and got a story into the homeroom news. And then we also created this video to speak to some of those points. This video was played at the point where the students were about to take the survey. And again, it was aimed towards helping them feel more informed about what they were doing and the safety of engaging in the surveys. We thought it was important for people to hear what we were messaging to the students. The video is only like 2 minutes, and involves some of the people here who won't quit their day jobs, I promise. So with that, we'd just like to share the video briefly with the group tonight.
Hello, Daniel Han. My name is Scott Cochran, and I'm the Director of Madison Youth and Family Services. I'll be joined on this video by a few others to talk about the 2 school surveys that you're about to take. Let me say up front, we know that these are a lot of questions and some may feel very personal and sensitive. It's important for us to tell you all that a lot of time and energy goes into planning these surveys. These surveys are incredibly important snapshots of your social emotional well-being. They're 100% anonymous and safe for you to approach with honesty and accuracy. There are 2 links, one to the larger Search Institute survey, and that's the standard we've been using for the last 15 years, and it's been taken by millions of students across the country. The other is referred to as our addendum, and that was created by us with input from students, and it covers topics that are of interest closer to home. The addendum is rather short, and you may find some of the questions similar. That's because they are 2 separate surveys. These two surveys ask you about your own attitudes and behaviors across a very wide spectrum of areas.
Hi, I'm Catherine Barden from Madison Youth and Family Services. You're probably wondering why we do all these surveys. All of us tend to view the world based on what we see and hear directly around us. And so the question becomes, how do we really know what's going on beyond our own experiences? These surveys are a means to get responses that you know to be true and accurate about yourself. We survey youth because it gives us specific, direct, and measurable information straight from young people that's not influenced by perception. We know you're all probably feeling surveyed, tested, and quizzed all the time. That's why we do the survey once every 2 years. It's a balance between the need for the most up-to-date data and not taxing you guys more than we have to.
Hey guys, my name is Rebe and I'm a junior here at Hand. I know surveys are borderline annoying, but I do want to talk about why this one's pretty important. So let's start with the fact that this data is really and truly ours. It tells a part of our story, our student experience within the school and town. And this data helps us see our own trends and needs. It can be used by us when we need to make recommendations for changes. Like years ago, the survey data supported the addition of stress relief interventions during exams, and this led directly to the creation of stress relief activities, which includes therapy dogs. Those changes later helped set the foundation for Wellness Wednesdays. So basically, this data tells the adults in the community what is working and what isn't working so they can help support us better. So I know that these surveys are super annoying and you probably want to get to your next class, but do take this one seriously and try to be honest because I really think it's going to benefit the student body as a whole.
Hi, I'm Darian McMahon, and I'm a senior here at Hand. If we sometimes don't feel like the adults know what's going on with us, this survey gives every student here equal opportunity to tell them honestly and accurately what is going on. There are student groups that are associated with Madison Youth and Family Services that will work directly with them to look at the data and also share it with community stakeholders. While this survey results are important numbers, we the students help define what those numbers actually mean. It's about us, our data, our story, our needs.
Okay, so let's talk about the privacy. For both the Search Institute survey and for the addendum, the collection of the surveys is set up intentionally to protect your individual identity. Your completed surveys are handled independently of us and the school, and information like usernames, emails, or IP addresses are never recorded. So individual surveys are never traceable. We want you all to know that we've been doing this survey for 15 years, and we choose these survey instruments intentionally so you know you're safe. We also want you to protect your own privacy in the room when you're taking the surveys. So before you click the link, give yourself plenty of space between you and your classmates. Focus on your own answers. Protect your own privacy and respect the privacy of your fellow students. We thank you all for your time and attention to this video, and we appreciate you all taking the time to fill out these very important surveys.
All right, so obviously our students, again, are the stars. And, didn't mean to admit that surveys are really, in fact, super annoying, but we did feel like the students would know that anyway. If they don't learn it then, they're going to learn it when they have to do them as adults. Wanted, before we move on to the next slide, just mention, because I think we've got a few more people onto the presentation tonight, we are holding questions to the end. You can put questions on the Q&A link. Use chat to say hello to folks or to cheer on or tell people a good job. You can put questions in a Q&A, and at the end, you can also raise your hand and we'll bring you into the webinar to ask your question. And welcome. And with that, I'll hand it over to Catherine.
So just giving an overview, if you look at the survey results at a glance, our overall substance use is down, our developmental assets are up, and I'll get into what developmental assets are in a little bit. And while substance use is down, there are other risky behaviors and mental health needs that are either on the rise or emerging that we really want to pay attention to. So I think there's a lot going on, a lot to unpack. We'll go through it a little bit quickly. And I think the students being here is going to add way more depth to just the numbers that you see. And then hopefully we get some good questions and answers at the end. So as we get into 30-day use by substance, what we did was we kind of traced it back to when we first started doing the surveys, or when we first had survey data available that was Madison specific. So for alcohol, marijuana, and tobacco, you'll see that that goes back to 2006. And you'll see that, of course, as I mentioned, substance use is down across the board. So for alcohol, we're down to 25%. Marijuana use is down to 10%, and tobacco is down to 3%. Prescription drugs, we started tracking back in 2011. That was when it was added on to the Search Institute survey. So that's gone from 6% to 1%. And for vaping, it's gone from 29.3% in 2017, which again was when it was emerging and started to be included in surveys, to 16% in 2021. So we have seen decreases, and I know for some of them, when we first saw the results, we're like, wow, that's really low. But there's also really important information to highlight along with that. So again, we've seen the substance use go down over time, but over time there has been some level of ebb and flow, and we've seen years where it's gone up a little bit and then come back down, but overall it's down across the board. But it also mirrors the trends that we're seeing at the national level. So it's really important to note that this year, when the Monitoring the Future survey came out, they do the survey every year as opposed to us who does it every other year. But one thing that they mentioned when the survey data came out just about a month ago is that in 2021, they saw the largest decline in 30-day use across the board for all substances that they've seen in a single year since they started doing the survey in the 1970s. So it does really mirror the trends that we're seeing here as a community in Madison. Now, they only track grades 8, 10, and 12, which is a little bit different than the way we do it because we do grades 9 through 12. But it does kind of show those same exact patterns where, unfortunately, we didn't survey in 2020, so we didn't see any use go up, but there was that sharp decline for 2021. And we saw the same for marijuana use. Again, the sharpest decline that we've seen since the 1970s for a single year, but it also mirrors the data that we collected as a community. And it's also really important to note that, while marijuana use is down to 10%, alcohol use is down to 25%, we are still seeing the same pattern of use go up by grade. So there was one year that there was kind of an anomaly where the juniors were out drinking and out using the seniors in every substance. But that was only 1 year in the history of our survey. Since then, it's kind of gone back to the traditional where it goes up every year as kids get older. So the use rates are really low, especially for freshmen and sophomores. We do see that jump between sophomore and junior year, and then it continues to go up a little bit more for the senior year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Evan, who's going to talk about substance use and the things that he's noticed.
Yeah, so one thing to definitely take into account for the decrease in the numbers recently, like I know that I was definitely kind of shocked when I saw how like all of the numbers kind of decreased, because from what I had heard around, things were not really going down, like the consumption was not really going down a lot. Obviously COVID had a huge effect on that. People being stuck at home more. You're not gonna use drugs and alcohol as much as if you were to go out in a social setting, which is what accounted for the majority of the numbers from the years past. So that's really the big thing that I wanted to harp on was during quarantine, and then recently when kids are more cautious with going out, parents maybe are keeping them at home more. You're not going to use as many drugs and alcohol because usually kids do it the majority of kids can use those things in a social setting. So it's they either try it out when they're at a party or with a few friends. And since the pandemic kind of limited the amount of social interaction and physical interaction that you get with your friends, that I believe is a big reason why the numbers have dropped. And it'll be interesting to see in the future, hopefully when this is all over, that if the numbers will bounce back up to what they originally were before.
Okay. Thank you, Evan. So another thing that we included in our addendum piece of the survey that wasn't quite included in the Search Institute is a screening tool for anxiety and depression. So in the Search Institute, they asked kind of vaguely about how often you felt sad, and they kind of use that as the basis for depression. But we wanted, as a community, to have a little bit stronger of a stance in terms of really figuring out what's happening with our anxiety and depression numbers. So we started to include in 2017 the PHQ-4, which is a physician screening tool that's used. It's based on 4 different questions and how you rank on a scale of, I think, 0 to 3 with the 4 questions. And then that comes together in a cumulative score to give you where you fall in a range of no anxiety or depression, mild or moderate or severe. So we have data from 2017, 2019, and 2021. And you'll see that those moderate to severe numbers have continued to trend upward, whereas the mild numbers have kind of stayed the same, right around that 24%. But the moderate to severe have definitely increased over time. And you'll see here just how much it's increased. So it's definitely something that we've had on our radar. We've continued to monitor, and we want to continue to work on getting the numbers down in terms of anxiety and depression. When you break that down by grade, for the 9th graders, it's actually pretty evenly split between mild and moderate to severe. Obviously, anything else that's not represented there is in the no category. For the 10th graders, that kind of shoots up for the moderate to severe. It tops out for the juniors at 32% experiencing moderate to severe forms of anxiety and depression, and it starts to come back down a little bit for the seniors. For anxiety and depression by gender, so we broke this out by male, female, and the students who identified as non-binary, gender fluid, or other. So you will see that females are higher than males, but when you look at percentage rates, it's definitely higher, especially for the moderate to severe forms of anxiety and depression for those students who identified as non-binary, gender fluid, or other. So while they're smaller numbers, it's definitely a higher percentage of them. And when you break it down by sexual orientation, one thing that we asked is here in terms of how students identified was if they identified as part of the LGBTQ plus community, so that we can have more accurate data in terms of, what's happening with that group of people. If substance use rates are higher, if mental health issues are higher. So you will see in several slides, we kind of break that down based on students who identified as straight versus those who identified as part of the LGBTQ plus community. And for this one, unfortunately, it was kind of what we already kind of were suspecting, but we did see that 57% of the LGBTQ plus students reported that they had moderate to severe forms of anxiety and depression. And I'm going to turn it over to Becca and Bridget. Becca's going to talk a little bit about youth mental health in general, and then Bridget's really going to talk about the LGBTQIA plus impact and the community there.
Okay, so I feel like ever since COVID happened, there has been like a spike of mental health issues, especially with students, just because it's really hard when you can't get out and see your friends and play sports and all that fun stuff. But I also think that like social media really affects our generation, and it can be hard for parents and teachers to understand that because they didn't grow up with like phones and all that social media. So like social media sets like these really high expectations for us, and it can make anxiety worse for our students and community. I'll turn it over to Bridget.
Yeah, so I'm Bridget. I use she, her pronouns, just to let you know. And one of the main reasons why there's like such an increase of like depression and anxiety when it comes to LGBTQI plus individuals is because of bullying, mainly bullying in Daniel Hand and in our community, even though our school is very inclusive towards queer individuals. Many times we still have students who are, made fun of, homophobic, transphobic slurs still being used. And those types of behaviors really just lower self-esteem, lower self-worth, and many times queer people, just find themselves feeling like they're abnormal or not accepted into society. And that's a really significant reason for this, amount and this percentage. You also just have the fact that our school in particular, and most our community, we really don't normalize queer relationships or queer voices. Our schools don't really talk about gender or sexual orientation in like a normal class setting, especially when it comes to like English or history. So not normalizing those individuals again makes people feel like they don't have any self-worth, and then they're not part of society, and they're not being represented. So these are all factors that cause this kind of amount of depression and anxiety.
Thank you both. So another thing that we track in terms of youth mental health is the attempted suicide rate, and we kind of broke this down by gender. You'll see here we only have male and female. That's because this was taken from the Search Institute portion of the survey. So they typically break down the survey results based on male versus female. Anybody who identifies as trans gets put into the category that they identify as. And then with the other percentages, because a lot of times they're so much smaller, they don't give us the breakdown. So we're sometimes limited in terms of gender based on Search Institute results. But we did want to highlight that, it did go up, unfortunately, between 2019 and 2021. You'll see it's higher for females than it is for males. 12% of our females have attempted suicide at least once versus 7% of males. And there isn't a perfect correlation to state data that we have, but we do have some state data from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. They do only capture 12 months. So if a student had attempted suicide in the last 12 months of the survey, they would be represented in their survey, and that number was about 6.7%. But our survey is more inclusive and asks about over their lifetime. So it could have happened when they were in 8th grade versus, something that happened in the last 12 months. So our numbers are traditionally going to be a little bit higher than that because we're not just capturing the last year. So this year, we're really thankful that we have such a strong partnership with our school system, and they were willing to have us include these questions in our survey. There is a slight limitation to that, in that it's really hard to find comparable data to other communities because they're not including sexual assault and sexual harassment data and stuff like that. So a lot of times we're having to go back to self-reports of, especially police reports and stuff like that. We know that sexual assault is traditionally underreported in that way. But we did ask our students if they've ever been sexually assaulted. And we use the language that you see in front of you because it was language that we were already using in our groups in the school system and in our programs in the school system. So we wanted to have language that was hopefully inclusive and something that they were already used to hearing and thinking about as a definition. And you will see that 16% of our students did report that they've been sexually assaulted at least one time. Again, when I talk about the comparable data for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, their questions are really specific to physically forced to have sexual intercourse or related to dating violence. And we know that sexual assault is so much larger than that, which is, again, why we use the language that we did. So you'll see that, again, their numbers, while they're smaller, they just don't really correlate to the numbers that we were capturing in our survey. So when we look at the victim of sexual assault numbers by gender, what we did was we broke it down by the actual number, and then you'll see the percentages in the bars that kind of represent that. But you will see, females definitely outnumbered the other genders in terms of the number of times that they were a victim of sexual assault or the number of students. And when you break it down for the non-binary, gender fluid, or other, it was 20% have experienced sexual assault at least once or twice, and 31% was multiple times. But number-wise, you'll see that the females had more assaults. And when we break it down by sexual orientation, the number of students who identified as straight were outnumbered the LGBTQ plus students by number, not percentage, except when it came to multiple times, then the LGBTQ students outnumbered the straight students, not only number-wise, but percentage-wise as well. I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Darian to talk about sexual assault and what they've been doing at the high school.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a senior at Hand, and about sexual assault in general. And I'm pulling, from my experiences as a teenager in the community and my friends, but also from different leadership roles that I have. Just to give you a little bit of context, I work a lot with girls in the high school specifically and female empowerment. And in my experience, many teenagers have a very hard time admitting to themselves that they have been sexually assaulted, or to anybody else, or to their friends. So when you have a hard time putting that label on what has happened to you, because defining anything makes it scarier, it might, in my opinion, lead the data to be a little bit lower. But even if it's not, I know the percentages themselves might seem low in comparison, but 61 females and 24 males and 7 students who identify as non-binary, gender fluid, or other, those are numbers that definitely need a significant amount of work. And I think that in general, what I have noticed is sexual assault that occurs, at least at Hand, is more complex than the simple consent lessons that we're taught in school. It's not always necessarily being raped by somebody that you don't know, or when one person is intoxicated and vulnerable and the other person isn't, or there's some sort of power dynamic. It usually happens in couples, people that have been dating for a long time, and that line gets very blurred. Happens in friend groups where the other people in that group are friends with both people, so they don't want to necessarily place blame on either person because it makes social dynamics more complicated. Happens maybe when both people are intoxicated, or maybe it's not alcohol, it's marijuana, which makes it a little bit more complicated. Or somebody can't remember exactly what happened, and then rumors get spread of different stories that are going on. I think that, the main thing that I want to get across is that it is more complex than the lessons that were being taught necessarily. And I think that it is harder to report or to ask for help when those boundaries are blurred and we don't necessarily know what the line is in those situations, which is why I believe that we need more education about consent in the gray areas in situations, at least for what's practically happening. Darian, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so Katie said really everything that needed to be said, but one thing that we've actually done in the school to change this narrative is talk to the sports captains. We see that in Hand and around the town that sports are a big buzz, whether it's boys sports, girls sports, it really doesn't matter. People buy into the Madison Tiger community, and it's one thing that people really follow. So over the summer we had this idea to get these captains in a room and start talking to them and really go over the things like the gray area, bystander intervention, and things that they can do, so that these captains could then go on and talk to their teams, as leaders and role models, and be able to hopefully help change this narrative. So as of right now, we were able to do this with the winter captains, and we were able to have all these winter captains in a room and talk to them about all these things that Katie talked about, specifically the gray area, bystander intervention, and things that may not have been taught in the health lessons that the curriculum has. So overall, what we were able to do is get these captains in a room, talk to them about all these things, and then they just go out and talk to their teams. And as of right now, we're in between steps. We're waiting to get back with our winter captains and hear what they have to say about not only how the talk went with their team, but what they think could be better for the spring sports captains and for the years following.
Yeah, and the overall thought process behind that program in general was that we wanted to get this message out to as many people as possible, and we wanted natural leaders in our community to be able to bring that message to other students. And sports are huge in Madison, specifically at Hand, and we felt like captains are in a very unique role as far as their impact on a team's social dynamic and setting an example with how to behave and how not to behave. And we specifically focused on working with the captains, and we were really grateful for the support of Mr. Salutary and other administration and MYFS for allowing us to do this and for working with us on it. But we basically focused on how we can set positive examples as leaders for what small actions are contributing to rape culture as a community, and how we can negate those actions and hopefully eliminate or at least, lessen the effects of victim blaming and, some of the other nuances that go into sexual assault.
Thank you both. So another question that we included was about sexual harassment, and we asked if they've ever experienced sexual harassment in their lifetime. So we saw that 34% of our students did respond they've been sexually harassed at least once. When we break that down again by the numbers, and you'll see the percentages in the bars as well, the females definitely outnumbered the other genders. However, in terms of percentages, there was really no comparison with the non-binary, gender fluid, or other students, especially with the 53% multiple times. So definitely percentage-wise, it was highest among the non-binary, gender fluid, or other students, and number-wise overall, highest among the females. I'm going to turn it back over to Katie to talk about sexual harassment.
Yes, so I think that sexual harassment is more common, at least at the high school level, than sexual assault. And I think that it is so common and can take so many different forms that students might not even recognize that they are experiencing sexual harassment, or they are, viewing it happening to other students. I think that sometimes there is sort of an attitude at our age that, boys will be boys, not to place all the blame on boys, because it is a community issue that we are responsible for fixing. But I think that it's easier in some way for students to speak out about sexual harassment because there is sort of a feeling of community surrounding it, which is sad but true. I mean, to give you an example, if I ever bring this up at a Girls United meeting, almost everybody raises their hand that they have experienced this or seen this in some way. And, I think it's in this issue, it's less about victim blaming than it is about sexual assault. And it's not necessarily as isolating, because just because it is more common, I think a lot of girls specifically view it not as serious because it is more common. And, what this could look like is female athletes or performers being objectified, or negative things being, yelled from the student section about their body, or possibly having uniforms that people make comments about at school. This is just sort of a random example, but I do know a lot of girls that won't even wear skirts to school because there's sort of a common theme of guys looking up your skirts when you walk up the stairs. There's sort of slut shaming, for lack of a better term, but I think that a lot of the time blame is placed on females in cases of cheating or ambiguous sexual situations, while the guys are not usually as blamed. I think those can be some of the examples of how this takes form in the school community. But, as we mentioned before, all of these are just little things that relate to rape culture in general, and they can absolutely escalate. And, part of the program that we are working on is stressing how everything is interconnected, and we need more education in general on how to sort of combat that cultural aspect in order to lessen the effects of the problem.
Thank you, Katie. And of course, we wanted to break it down based on sexual orientation as well. So you'll see a similar pattern to what we saw with the sexual assault, where the straight students outnumbered the LGBTQ students in the once or twice category, but that was not the case when it came to multiple times. The LGBTQ plus students outnumbered the straight students, not only in number, but again, in percentage. And I'm going to turn it over to Bridget to talk about that.
I think for gender non-binary individuals, especially, people in our community and in our school kind of see them as easy targets. It's very difficult for straight people or even, people in the LGBTQ community to stand up for individuals and be allies. So you really see this bystander effect, and many times individuals take advantage and, sexually harass, sexually assault non-binary individuals, especially because they just see them as like abnormal or, not part of normal society, and that's completely and obviously not the case. They're individuals as well, so you really do see this like power dynamic a lot when it comes to our school and our community especially. It's also just we in family situations, a lot of times queer individuals can't come out. Many times they have homophobic family members or transphobic family members, and it's so difficult to express themselves and be themselves. Many times it's very easy for them to be harassed, to be assaulted, to be taken advantage of in those situations. Though it's, very rare in our community, it's still something that happens, and it's still a big problem. So, it's just really difficult to have these experiences happen to you, especially many times they go unnoticed. We tend to focus on the female population, which we should, but many times non-binary individuals kind of are swept under the rug, and we don't acknowledge the sexual harassment and sexual assault that also occurs in our school and in our community. So something to acknowledge as well.
Thank you, Bridget. So we also asked about observed harassment. So seeing if students have directly observed peers being sexually harassed. It's interesting because that number is definitely lower than those who have admitted that they've been sexually harassed. So maybe it's not happening as much publicly as is totally happening. So maybe it's not representing everything, but it's interesting to see that 19% of the school population has directly observed peers being sexually harassed at least once. We also included questions on discrimination based on ethnicity, culture, and or religion. So we did see that 20% of our student population feels like they have been discriminated based on culture, ethnicity, or religion at some point. We put this in our addendum, so unfortunately we didn't ask the questions about ethnicity, culture, or religion, so we don't know what the breakdown is there. We just know that it has happened. So if it's something that we include in our survey in 2 years from now, which I hope we do, we'll definitely have to add in a few more questions in terms of how students identify culturally and racially, just to kind of get more of a breakdown and get more information about that. And now we're going to get into the 40 developmental assets. So this is actually one of the reasons why we use the Search Institute survey. The Search Institute survey breaks down these 40 building blocks that young people need in order to really thrive and be successful. So they include 20 internal and 20 external assets. And there's different things that include and make up your support system, whether it's positive adult role models or, having a high self-esteem or sense of purpose. So there are these 20 things that we know that the more a student has, the more likely they are to avoid drugs and alcohol or other risky behaviors. So one of our big goals has really been to get more students into that 21 to 40 asset category. Obviously, the more that we can get into the 31 to 40, the better. But 21 to 40 is, our first jump at really trying to make a difference in the lives of our students. So we see that 57% of our students do report to having 21 to 40 assets, which is up from 52% in 2015. And only 5% of our students now report having the 0 to 10 assets, which is really good. That's down from 9% in 2015. So the more we can chip away at that category, the better. And the more we can get them into the 21 to 40 range, even better. So why assets are important? This is right from our own Madison data. We know that the more assets a student has, less likely they are to engage in their 24 risk-taking behaviors that we survey. So if you're in the 21 to 30 category, you're engaged in about 2 of those 24 risk factors, and for the 31 to 40, less than 1. And when you break it down by substance use, you'll see that not only does the alcohol use go down pretty drastically once you get to that 21 to 30 category, but when you get to the 31 to 40 category, there was no reported use of tobacco, marijuana, or prescription drugs for students that fell into the 31 to 40 asset range. So again, the more we can get our students into that 31 to 40 or even that 21 to 30, the more likely they are to avoid risky decisions, substance use, and they'll feel more supported. And hopefully we can launch them off out of Madison with those support systems that will help get them through college and entering into adulthood. So for our asset strengths as a community, the top assets that we have are school engagement, integrity, achievement motivation, positive peer influence, youth programs, and family support. For our asset challenges, it's students involved in religious communities, restraint, parent involvement in schooling, community values youth, creative activities, and reading for pleasure. One thing I will say about asking high school students about their parents' involvement in schooling, there's no surprise that goes down over time. As students go up into high school, parents are less likely to be checking in with teachers as much or be as actively engaged as they are in elementary and even middle school. And community values youth, unfortunately, is low across the board in all communities that use this Search Institute survey. And reading for pleasure has always been our lowest, but I will say, slight good news, it did come up over the last 2 years from 2019. I think we might have the pandemic to thank for that, but it did come up a little bit. When we took a 10-year snapshot of our asset trends, what we did was we separated out assets that rose by 10 percentage points or more, or decreased by 10 percentage points or more. So the assets that have come up by at least 10 percentage points in the last 10 years are school engagement, positive peer influence, adults as role models, equality and social justice, caring, honesty, responsibility, and cultural competence. Those that have decreased by 10 percentage points or more are service to others, safety, religious community, self-esteem, and sense of purpose. And we're going to get a little bit more into the safety and the self-esteem. So one of the reasons why we pulled out the self-esteem and the safety was there were huge gender differences in these two assets. So not only have they both decreased over time, but we see now a 20 percentage point difference between our males and females in terms of self-esteem. It's 52% for males, 32% for females. And for safety, not only has that also come down over time, but it's 76% for males, but only 46% for females. So that one is a 30 percentage point gap, which is the largest gap between males and females that we see in the entire survey and addendum. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. When you look at self-esteem percentages over time, you'll see that the males kind of stayed the same between 2019 and 2021. The females declined, unfortunately. It's not the largest gap that we've seen. You can see that was back in 2013, but it's still, a gap that we need to pay attention to. And when it comes to safety, a lot of times the question is, well, what goes into safety? How do we know what the kids are thinking when they respond to not feeling safe in the community? So safety is determined by answers to 3 different questions about how safe they feel walking around their neighborhood, the likelihood of being hurt by someone in school, or the likelihood of being hurt by somebody in their home. So those are the 3 questions that go into safety overall. And you'll see that safety numbers, again, have kind of gone up and down a little bit, but it came back up for the males over the last 2 years, and they've just been declining steadily since 2015 for the females, which has created that really wide gap. I'm going to turn it over to Ruby to talk about self-esteem and safety.
Okay, hey guys, I'm Ruby. I'm a junior at Hand, and I want to talk about safety and self-esteem because, I have some personal anecdotes for them. There are 2 things that I definitely struggle with. And I think on the self-esteem note first, there definitely is a discrepancy between girls and guys. I think I personally am super self-conscious as a girl about how I look and how I dress and how I act in school and stuff. And I don't think that that's an isolated thing that's just specific to me. I think it happens to a lot of girls. And I think it's because of the environment. It's definitely not a fault of the administration at all. It's just the student community has this tendency in hand, because the academics are so great, that competitive aspect sometimes gets translated over. It actually does get translated over socially. And the problem there is that then there's this huge thing where girls, at least in my own experience, have all this pressure to dress the right way and say the right things and everything, more than guys, although I can't speak for guys at all, and I know that's just a generalization, but and it's super stressful. And I think, like, I personally know that I'm definitely insecure at times, like, but I found myself wishing that I could express that more in school. I think there's a stigma everywhere, not just Daniel Hand, that you have to pretend like everything's perfect all the time and you're totally fine all the time. And I think that really contributes terribly to self-esteem, because it's really hard to pretend all the time. And I think if the student atmosphere was able to change its perspective a little from being such a competitive attitude on who can one up the other person and kind of shooting people down to climb up the ladder, I think if we change that into something where it was more, let's build each other up and let's create a comfortable platform for our problems and normalize expressing our problems, I think that would help a lot of things. So again, it's not entirely about the administration, it's more just about the student community and that competitiveness that comes with academics, but now it's translated over socially, and that really hurts self-esteem. The other thing that I really wanted to touch on was safety. So obviously, again, by the statistics, huge difference between girls and guys. And so first, I just want to offer just a few quick examples just for some contextualization. So the first thing is like preventative measures, basically. So girls like have whistles and bells and pepper spray and everything attached to their keys at all times. And these things have become so popular, these defense tools and everything, that brands have actually dedicated, like made tons of money off them, like selling pink pepper spray that matches like whistles and everything. I think that's, when you think about that, that's a little bit messed up. Just the fact that, like, on a guy's keys, like my brother, for example, there's like nothing, just a single key. And then on mine, there's like pepper spray and whistles and everything. It's just a little bit, it's just definitely a discrepancy there. And then for a personal anecdote, like I've definitely, at least on multiple cases, kind of been in the situation where I felt very unsafe, not necessarily in school, but definitely in the community and stuff. Like, for example, 2 days ago, and this is just totally coincidental, I was going to go for a run, it was getting late-ish at night, and my dad just like, before I leave, hands me pepper spray and shows me how to use it and says that if I see any creepy guys, like to run straight back home and just look in the direction of the house. And it was just it was like a 5-minute spiel. And then my brother, when he like goes whatever to run at night or something, I handed him the pepper spray, and my dad and everyone just started laughing. So it's definitely like, there's a definite difference here that's very apparent. And so another quick example is that when I go into the city and stuff like New Haven or New York, or even sometimes Madison at night, I have to like put my hair is pretty blonde, so it stands out a lot. So I have to put it in a very tight bun with a baseball cap and sunglasses and a dark overcoat. And it's not always that extreme, but there's definitely an issue. So point being that I think the takeaway should be that as a girl, I'm on a constant high alert. And I think a lot of girls can empathize with that in the school. And I've definitely had a few cases where I just felt so uncomfortable in public. So I think that we need to kind of work as a community to make girls and everyone, and guys too, feel safer, and just kind of teach guys, and I don't want to target guys, as Katie said too, but teach everybody just to be respectful and cognizant of that. So yeah.
Thank you. So just a few other areas of concern. Perception of harm from marijuana decreased back in, it kind of decreased over time. Between 2019 and 2021, it remained the same, but it's also at the lowest level we've ever seen it. And only 55% of our students saying that they think that there's moderate to great risk in regular marijuana use. So obviously with everything in pop culture and everything else, it definitely doesn't help that number. We don't have retail stores yet, but they're going to be happening. So it's something we need to continue to keep our eye on, and continue to educate young people about the danger of marijuana and what it can do to a developing especially brain and body, especially when we're talking about your brain really not being fully developed yet and giving it that time to fully cook as it should between the time of now and when you're about 25. Another area of concern, this is one that we heard a lot from students over the last year or two, was about eating disorders, especially during the pandemic. So when we looked at the survey results this past year when it came out, there was a 10 percentage point jump in the number of females that responded to having some anorexic or bulimic behavior. So that number went from 17 to 27%, and 20% of our student body overall has engaged in disordered eating. So it's, again, something to definitely keep our eyes on, continue to track and continue to educate and do more as a community to hopefully bring those numbers back down. I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Becca to talk about eating disorders.
I think with eating disorders, this was also something that was very heavily influenced by the pandemic. But, a couple of the other panelists have touched on the fact that during the pandemic, everybody, not only teenagers, but specifically teenagers, felt as though they didn't have any control over their lives, which is natural. We've never really been in a global pandemic like this of this scale, but we couldn't control who was getting sick or what events were getting canceled, if we were going to school online, if we could see our friends. And, eating is one thing that a lot of students felt as though they could control. And, when you are at home or you are isolated, there is absolutely a lack of structure to your day and to meal times in general. So when you are at school, there is a clear period that you have for lunch, most students, unless you have some sort of crazy schedule, but there's basically an enforced time in a way that like you're supposed to eat in public. And when you're at home and you're isolated, you don't necessarily have that. So I think eating habits in general were very irregular during online school and during this original isolation period. And I think that this trend has continued. I would say that I have more friends who don't eat at all at school than I do have friends who eat at school, which I would not have said before the pandemic. So that is definitely something to think about. And I also think that in general with the pandemic, I know this is probably something that all of you tonight can relate to, but there was a lot of pressure surrounding doing something productive with yourself during this time, which I always think is kind of funny because to me, it felt like an accomplishment to just cope with everything that was going on. But I think that that attitude and, that pressure to do something productive or to sort of work on your appearance while you had that extra time during the pandemic sort of also manifested into disordered eating and trying to control the way that you were eating, because that was one of the only ways and one of the easier ways that we felt like we knew how to do during the during the original isolation, but during the pandemic specifically. And, I don't say this to scare anybody or to be dramatic, but I genuinely have very few, if any, close friends who haven't struggled with this at some point. And it doesn't mean that I don't have any friends who don't have eating disorders, because it's not always necessarily eating disorders in full, but disordered eating, I would say. Absolutely. So I think that it is very normalized at our age. And it is also one of those things that students don't reach out for help as much, in my opinion, regarding this, because I think that when it is this common, it's not necessarily something that we recognize as unusual. And it relates to sort of self-esteem as well, that Rebbie was talking about, specifically for girls that I've noticed, but also for boys can do the same thing. But, controlling your eating in a way to sort of control your self-esteem at a very vulnerable time in our lives. And then Becca.
Hi, I forgot to mention that I'm Becca Snyder and I'm a sophomore at Hand, so I just thought I'd introduce myself. I thought that it was really interesting to put a focus on how, just to put the percentages into numbers. I feel like that gives me a better visual. That 1 in 4 girls at Daniel Hand have an eating disorder, which really was an eye-opening. I remember we were talking about it in the meeting. We were like, that is crazy. And it's just so common in our society and just in Daniel Hand. I feel like sometimes we don't really think that it's in Hand because we have such a sheltered community, but this whole survey is so enlightening. I thought I would talk about social media and the huge effect that it has on our generation, because social media brings in so much more things that we can't even like begin to talk about because it's like such a huge topic. It affects our mental health, it affects how much we eat, it affects how stressed out we are. It has huge effects that like we don't even know. Social media, like especially on TikTok, I see it all the time. It like promotes eating disorders and like glamorizes it, and it like makes it into this like not like wonderful thing, but like it makes it more appealing to our generation in a way, and it like makes it feel less bad because it's so normalized and talked about in our generation. Like I was talking to some friends and we were talking about how much like it shows up on our For You page, which is like TikTok. And it's crazy what you like see in the comments and what you hear. It's just incredible. And I also thought that like social media creates these standards that are like incredibly unbelievable. It's edited, it's posed, and it is nothing like what women look like in reality. And I think that like has a huge effect and influences so much in our community. That's all I really have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's actually the perfect segue to our last area of concern, which is the impact of social media on young people. With the smartphones and getting them younger and younger, there's definitely the access to pornography and other inappropriate content, especially it's developmentally inappropriate at times based on age. It could reinforce those unhealthy gender stereotypes. It can be direct access to bullying and harassment. We could access drugs and alcohol and other things. And of course, we know with more and more studies coming out that there is a direct impact on youth mental health. So just before we wrap up, we like to talk about what adults can do. The big thing is stay current with different trends and discuss those trends with teens. Provide pushback on any unhealthy messages that you might see. Reinforce some of the positive, healthy social norms for young people. Talk about the 75% of Daniel Hand High School students that didn't drink in the last 30 days as opposed to the 25 that did, and reinforce the fact that, we live in a community full of amazing youth and amazing teenagers. And I think we have evidence of that tonight, but to continue to, talk about the positives that we have in our community and really reinforce that, and then see what we can do to work on those other numbers that are concerned. Get to know the developmental assets framework. There's definitely a lot more information on that and different ways that you can work together as a community to create more assets for young people and to be your best role model, because we do know that that is definitely one of the developmental assets. The more adults that we have in the community reaching out and providing those connections to young people, the better. I'm just going to turn it over to Scott, but before I do so, I just want to, again, thank our students for being on because they provide so much more context and, they make this data presentation that much more rich. Instead of just staring at numbers, we're getting stories and we're getting their input to really bring those numbers to life. And I think that that's one of the best things that we could do is have our student leaders on with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about what is being done.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all of our students. Great job. And to talk about what we're doing, and this slide could really be 50 slides, but as it's at the end, we are very glad that it's brief. And we'll just try to summarize and share with people, like we are, our Madison Youth and Family Services, the breadth of programming that we provide day in and day out, every year, doing our clinical services, our prevention services, like we are the boots on the ground, and we partner so closely with our school system, from top down administratively, to the direct interactions with students, program planning, doing programs with school personnel. So we are this year, because we were concerned about mental health, doing a lot more, providing resources into the schools, supporting the schools to do things into health classes, providing suicide prevention training, So that's known as QPR. It stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a prevention model that's evidence-based. We have done community trainings. We are aiming to train every student at Daniel Hand this year in that model for suicide prevention. We sponsor and partner with the school to provide a gender and sexuality program, that's GASP, as well as the Rainbow Lounge, that's at Polson. We have quite a few youth-led advocacy groups, and I think the star of the show tonight was the Girls United group, who very much in concert with us, but also very much on their own, and can mention that all these students are participating in our programs, contributing to our programs, but are also standing up quite a bit on their own and advocating and working on projects and things that just make the community much better. So we need to acknowledge that as well. We need to continue doing as much prevention work on sexual assault. As I think has been pointed out here in spades, we really have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of messaging that hits on our youth as they're growing up, and probably much younger than high school and even into middle school, where the culture supports behaviors that start to take root, take hold, and many more messages to youngsters as they're growing up that are not as healthy as we would like them to be. And we got to work on that. It's going to be a heavy lift, but we need to work on that. And that's a community ownership. That's not just on the schools or just on the parents. We all got to own that. And as was stated here, this is not just a girl issue. It's a boy issue. It's a people issue that we got to work on. I think we need to continue doing much more community outreach. That's a big part of what we want to do, and creating more youth leadership opportunities. And with that, I think, thank you for your time and attention going through the presentation. We're going to move to questions, and can't see the gallery. So I think maybe what we'll do is start. Molly, is there anybody with their hand raised?
Let me look.
So if you do have a question, we'll start with hands in the gallery first.
No hands in the gallery. I think there's a couple of questions though. I know there was one question in the chat that asked if there was a chapter of SAD, Students Against Destructive Decisions, at hand.
By name, no, I do not believe that there is a chapter of SAD.
We don't have a specific SAD chapter, but we do have a group called Valor, which is a student group that is focused on reducing youth substance use in our school and community. We actually have our 4 Valor leaders right here on the screen. And it's interesting because I'm very familiar with SAD because I used to be the state coordinator for Connecticut. It's a great program, but ours is a little bit different in terms of what we're able to kind of provide and change up in the curriculum.
There is somebody in chat who is saying, hi, I have a question. Can you see that, Molly? Is that Marianne?
Oh, okay, I'll find her.
Okay.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's Mary. This is Mary Ann Connolly. The question, I just wanted to know how many students, percentage-wise, did every student fill out this survey, or what was the percentage of students that filled out this survey?
So we did the survey for every student in grades 9 through 12. There were a few students who were absent or didn't take the survey. I think overall we had, I think it was all but 100 students ended up filling them out, or some of them were thrown out because of inconsistencies or false information that was added.
Okay.
So we got a good number.
Good, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else with their hand up, Mo? All right, so we do have some questions in the Q&A. We'll just go down.
I just brought John Michael Parker in. He had his hand up.
All right, thanks. Go ahead,
Hey,
John Michael.
folks. Hey, everybody. Actually, I'll be very brief so that you can get to some of those other questions, because I just wanted to acknowledge the young folks that were here tonight, and certainly the whole team at Youth and Family Services for the work that you're doing, and just say how important this is and how grateful we are to learn. So, looking forward to continuing to support in these initiatives in any way possible. And just a big thank you, and just so impressed by how articulate and thoughtful and proactive all the students are that are working on these issues. So really grateful for the team.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here. All right, so Molly, I'll read some questions out of the Q&A. One question from Seth Klaskin: in future years, could MYFS also survey whether students perceive discrimination based on socioeconomic status? I think the short answer to that would be yes. We do quite a bit of work leading up to the surveys and creating them, at least on the addendum side of things. So we get input from the students, as well as we look at information and questions that we have among our staff. And so could absolutely include that. And Seth has a couple more questions here. By the way, Seth is I believe the chair of the Board of Ed currently, and glad you're here, Seth. Can the students please comment on the perception of fear of gun violence in school? Wondering if any of our student panelists would like to comment on that.
I can comment on it. I think that, for me, it's not necessarily a black and white issue. I do think that growing up in a generation where we are relatively frequently doing lockdown drills in our classes, or seeing school shootings happen in other communities, and seeing this narrative sort of on social media as well, I think that it's not hard to get frustrated about that fear going on in schools. And I also think that, like many other issues, one very small rumor can sort of escalate into mass hysteria or mass panic, because it's a very scary thing. But I mean, I've been here for 4 years, and as a student, I do feel safe in this aspect going to school. I trust Mr. Salutary, I trust Mr. Cook, and I think that I know that we wouldn't be in school if there was a significant threat to our safety. But at the same time, I think that there is, other students correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there is sort of a feeling of frustration just that it has come to this point as a society in general, and it's not necessarily like a district thing. That's sort of how I feel about it.
Yeah, just a case point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bridget. Oh, but okay. Oh no, quickly, just a case point. Yeah, I mean, she said it perfectly. I think personally, I have never, again, just on a personal account, I've never felt particularly scared by this, at least in terms of like it happening at hand. Just like Kay said, I have a lot of trust in Mr. Salutary and Dr. Cook, and I think that that they're doing an incredible job keeping the school super safe and making sure that the students feel that way too. And I think that definitely, to Kay's point though, it's definitely, there is a kind of feeling of my stomach has definitely dropped a teeny bit when there's so much news reporting about school shootings happening a lot of other places. But I do feel very confident in the school system that we're protected. Although there is always that 1% kind of feeling like it could happen anywhere. But yeah, 99% pretty confident.
I think there's also an issue when it comes to like lockdowns and stuff, that people don't necessarily see the importance of it until you're the school that is now in the news. So you do have kids in classrooms, which I've witnessed firsthand, where they're like, well, it's just a drill, it's fine. Like, we'll sit in our chairs, or we'll do, it's fine. We'll play on our phones, or we'll talk. It's okay. And that type of mentality kind of takes away from the significance of doing lockdowns and the significance that still comes with gun violence, especially in America, because, you know, but so if we explained and we expressed the significance of lockdown drills a little bit more and, you know, explain that these are real situations, even if it may not happen to our school, there are things that need to be taken seriously and not talk while, you know, we're in a lockdown drill. I think that would be also very effective.
Becca, did you want to share something?
It was pretty much covered. I think I definitely agree with it about making sure that we're taking everything seriously, just in case for that 1%, like Rebu was talking about. I feel like sometimes we don't really take it seriously, not just in the student body, but also with the teachers sometimes. But that's like a rare occasion, and we always need to take these situations with precaution. And I think we have. So I'm pretty proud of our leaders in the student school. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. I will ask the next question. Also to the students, anecdotally based on the discussion with friends and peers, to what degree do academic or college acceptance competitiveness cause stress to the point of anxiety and depression? I can just say pre-pandemic, like this was the main question often to the panelists. And it's an issue obviously that still exists. And do we have any panelists that would like to speak to it?
Yeah, so just real quick, I think it's less about competition between friends, you know, some of my friends are smarter than me, some of them may not be. Who cares? We're all going to go off and live great lives. But as far as the anxiety and depression that may come with it, you know, during the fall, I was trying to complete my applications, but I would be coming off a 7 o'clock football practice, and I just want to go home and get some sleep. And it does become very difficult, you know, to really attempt to balance that. But the thing with college applications is there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So I feel, at least for me, obviously you're going to be able to hear from other panelists, but at least for me, once I was able to hit submit and get a couple of acceptances, you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. You know, senior year got much easier after that.
Yeah, also going on what Darian said from a little different point, sports, the whole like recruiting process for college is definitely throws a loop into, and it definitely like makes you more stressed, at least it did for me. And especially during COVID, like it was just so hard for everybody. Like all of the coaches that I've talked to in sports have said that like all of their recruiting classes are all messed up, and just COVID has thrown like such a wrench into that part of like the college aspect and the sports aspects that it definitely adds to some stress. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, like Darian said.
Yeah, going off what Evan was saying, I'm currently going through that process, and I can tell you that it's pretty stressful. And honestly, there's so much to do, and there's all that, and that can totally add to stress on top of school, on top of full-time sports. And you have to do this so that you can you feel like you can do this so you can get into college, but it's just adding so much more pressure onto things that like are supposed to be like really fun and exciting for students, and like stress relieving instead of stress inducing.
I also think, I mean, I don't know, to be completely honest with you, the college application process is kind of awful, at least in my experience. I mean, I also did apply to 20 colleges, so it could not be that difficult if you don't make it that difficult, but it depends like what group you sort of ride with in high school. I mean, I always had different friend groups outside of this, but I was in this like advanced math program, and that group of kids is really cutthroat, unnecessarily cutthroat. And in that way, it was a very competitive environment, and it was students placing stress on other students for kind of no reason. And that made the college application process a little bit worse. But I also think it's not really teachers or administrators or even like parents, at least in my experience, that have these really high expectations of us. It's the pressure that we put on ourselves And I think that that's sort of a cultural thing, a societal thing. I know living in the town where most kids do go to college, and we have great resources to be able to figure out the college application process. I think that I put a lot of stress on myself. And when you are putting a lot of stress on yourself, it's important to remember that you have to separate who you are as a person from college acceptances and from a process where they're sort of looking at you as an applicant on a piece of paper, and they're not looking at you as a person that as a whole. But I think it's very difficult to have that perspective at our age. And in that way, I think that kids do sort of struggle with the process. And it's honestly one of the first times in a lot of our lives where we have to deal with rejection of the things that we really, really wanted. So in that way, I think it's been kind of stressful. And it's also a hard year to apply because of overflow candidates in the last couple of years that maybe deferred for a year. So that's a different aspect as well.
Yeah, also one quick thing to Katie's point too, like I'm only a junior, so I'm not technically applying yet, but it's funny how like even it like the college thing, I feel like it used to be mainly just really exclusive to seniors, and now it's kind of drifted down into the high school process. And I put so much pressure on myself to like be the ideal looking student for college. So like I like found myself, especially lately, like doing all of these things and the clubs I actually do because I like to do and that kind of stuff. But definitely with grade wise and everything, I've just been pushing myself so hard to do everything and look like this perfect ideal student. That's really not me in some ways. And so like I feel like my mom asked me like, oh, but what is it that you like to do, Rebbie, or something like I don't know, randomly a few months ago, and I literally couldn't come up with an answer. And so I think like it definitely was a little bit concerning, considering that like usually when someone responds, oh, what are your hobbies? Or if I'm like, sometimes I'm sitting in a group and everyone's like, oh, what are your hobbies? And I can't come up with anything because I'm like, studying, going to club, like it just, and you kind of lose yourself a little bit. So I think it's huge, and it's really dangerous too, because it's such a competitive atmosphere. And like Kay said, it's student versus student. It is not teacher and parent versus administration. It is like, who can get into the Ivy League, who can wear the sweatshirt that says the Ivy League, and then who can like succeed more in the future. It's this huge competition. So that's at least my perspective.
All right. Thank you all. And that tapped a nerve, didn't it? Great feedback. We have a person with their hand up. And then I think we'll take a few more questions out of the Q&A and we'll try to wrap at the top of the hour. Stephen, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
Hi, this is Stephen Penn. And it's clear to all of us this evening how capable our young people are and what a resource they potentially are to each other. I was wondering, in terms of Madison Youth and Family Services, whether you support programs of utilizing that student talent for peer mentoring programs, peer mediation. They clearly understand what their fellow students are experiencing, and in line with the recent comments about how competitive it is, maybe some counteractive attempts where young people are supporting each other. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think your question is towards like, what are we doing to support students to support each other, and quite a bit. So we have some foundational programming that we do and have done for decades, peer advocates, peer helpers. So those are programs that train young people to learn about themselves and to support their peers and to help their peers when they need help to connect to important adults. We do run a couple of different mentoring programs that connect high school students with younger students at the middle school level and also at the elementary school level. Again, we do these things in very close partnership with the schools. We couldn't do what we do without the schools. And I think, as you pointed out, we couldn't do what we do without the students. We work very hard to create opportunities for these incredible young people to take on leadership roles within our programs. But they also push us to look at these issues, to develop programs and evolve over time for the needs of the time. So I appreciate your question. I hope that I answered it to as much as I could, or at least to your satisfaction.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. All right. We'll go back to Q&A. So there is a question from, I think it's Kathleen Diana Riley, about the diversity of Daniel Hand and Madison. So I don't know that we can speak to that based on the survey, but I think if I'd direct you to maybe the school website or to somebody within the school system to speak to that question. A question from our superintendent, Dr. Craig Cook. How have other students responded to your work? For example, when you've approached the team captains, were they receptive to your suggestions or interventions? So this is to our students.
I'm not sure if this is referring to the project that we've been working on or something.
Yeah,
Is
I
it?
think so.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, I would like to ask Bridget. I mean, I felt that I mean, she's a captain of the fencing team, if I'm not mistaken, and you know, I felt that some captains were definitely more, you know, perceived it better than others, but we are looking forward to getting them back into a room and really, you know, trying to see what we can do better next time, and seeing how they really did perceive it and how their teams perceived it as well.
So I think there was some miscommunication at some moments, but I don't think any of the captains discussed about sexual harassment. We got an email from Salutary that we weren't allowed to discuss it until we had another meeting. So I'm positive that fencing hasn't, track and field has not either, from my brother that I heard. So there was, again, some miscommunication, I think. A lot of people took a lot of value out of it. I especially did. I thought it was great that we had this discussion. We talked about sexual harassment. There were a few people who I know for a fact were a bit confused and didn't really see the importance, or maybe kind of didn't really understand some of the aspects as to what you guys were getting at. But again, it was really vital and really important. It was just something that we were like, oh yes, we would love to discuss. We would love to have a meeting with our team, but we never did, because we assumed that we were going to have a meeting afterwards, and we never did. So yeah, it's kind of the problem there.
Well, thanks for your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely did have captains that did talk to their teams, because Darian and I both heard from some captains that did. And I think Melissa and Justin talked to some, and I'm not sure if Salutary did too, but there were a couple of teams that talked to us after about how their conversations with their team went. I'm not sure what the miscommunication with the email was, but we were definitely encouraging captains to talk to their teams before the next meeting. That meeting is definitely still going to happen. It just was awkward timing because we had a winter break in the meantime. But you know, as far as I can tell, there's always going to be people that don't absorb the message because they come in with a closed-minded attitude. And I think that did happen in some cases, but overall, I feel like it sort of made a positive impact, but it was a pilot for sure. So we have a ways to go.
Yeah, to totally comment on that, I got talked by my captains for field hockey, and I know that like football has been talked to, and I think they had like Warrior Wednesday, which is like supporting and stuff like that.
You know, and I'll reinforce something that Katie just mentioned. You know, these are very difficult conversations to start, and that they're happening now, and they're happening at the student level, student to student, is incredible progress. And yes, there's a lot of work still to be done. And Bridget, I hope you follow up with Mr. Salutary and sort out the issue you brought up. Want to get to the next question, and thank you all. So this is from Lyanne Lattori. I'd love to hear more from the students about the social media impact of anxiety and depression. Do students recognize how much phone time they have, and how do they feel about no phones in school or phone time limits? What apps are the most harmful for youth? So I'll ask one of the students maybe to speak to that so we can get to the last question before it gets much later. Go ahead, Becca.
Yeah, I totally love to have- Sorry.
Okay.
So sorry, let me turn off my phone. Speaking of it,
Good timing.
honestly, social media affects. Wait, let me just make sure I answer everything. Social media definitely has an effect on everyone, and I feel like some people it's way more affected, some people it's way less, but it's definitely a huge range, and I think it affects everyone in a certain way. And I feel like some people don't even recognize it sometimes because it's so normal to like have it, because it's like everyone has social media, like who doesn't? So it's like it's really normal to have like certain anxieties. Like personally, I hate posting on social media, it just freaks me out. And I do realize going to like how much time I spend on my phone. I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of a lot. But I realized that like TikTok is most alluring, that like I just get sucked in and I spend a lot of time on that, and it honestly makes it harder to do school because I spend so much time on my phone. So to do that, I just like turn it on do not disturb, turn it off, put it away. And I'd also like to highlight that over winter break, I just like completely deleted social media for like 2 weeks, and it was honestly amazing. So if you want to tell your kids that.
Thank you, Becca. I realized Molly just pointed out I did skip a question that was in the Q&A. It's from Penn McNerney. I agree with Scott's point about the need for community ownership of the problems related to sexual assault and harassment. What might that look like? Well, that is a big question, and probably one that's tough to answer in just a brief way. I think we need to continue doing a lot of what we're doing now. Public forums, public discussions, encouraging students to speak out, encouraging and getting adults in leadership positions to talk about this. One of the values I think about tonight is that we have a number of people here that are in leadership positions within the town, within the circles in which they work and that they live. We need you all to hear what's being said, to take the issues seriously. Sexual harassment, sexual violence, these are really embedded in the culture in which we live. And that won't change unless we have people that are in leadership positions, that are role models, that stand up to change it. So that means each of us in our own community, our own corners of the community, need to be talking about this, need to get more comfortable talking about this, and having tough conversations. And I'll say personally, we need to depoliticize this. This is not a political issue, and oftentimes some of the terms, the words that we use, they become political fodder, and that is the least helpful thing of anything that happens when we start talking about some of these issues. So before I get too fired up, I'll leave that there, and see if we can get a couple more questions in before it gets too much later. And thank you all for these wonderful questions. So from an anonymous questions, do you have information on students who feel racial discrimination within their school community? I have to say, not as a part of the survey beyond the statistic that we shared. So we did ask about a level of harassment that was experienced that was racially based or ethnically based. So you have that in the survey. We did not ask for more, as Catherine mentioned, we did not ask more information about the background, the demographic background of the respondents. So we can't connect that more as a part of our survey. And we may do that in the next survey.
Sorry, I know we can't connect from the survey, but I do know a few individuals. I mean, our school is not very diverse. There are students who actually have told me that they do feel discriminated against at times. especially those who are in the APC program when they're first coming into the school. It's really difficult for them because they may be paired with an individual who sometimes doesn't necessarily acknowledge, or try to help them integrating into the school, and all these types of issues that come about when, you are mainly surrounded by, white students. So there is, subtle racial biases in our school that has yet to be really acknowledged. But there is, still, we do have subtle racist tendencies, subtle racist biases in the Madison Public Schools that continuously try to be addressed, but sometimes it just falls short.
Thank you, Bridget, for adding that context. That was very helpful. Thank you. We have, I think, one more question in the Q&A. Nope, that was more of a thank you for an awesome presentation. Appreciate that. Molly, do we have any other hands up in the gallery?
No.
All right. So with that, please stay tuned to Madison Youth and Family Services. You can connect with us on our Facebook page. Keep an eye out on the town webpage, as well as any communications that you get from the schools when we do community programming, whether it's our QPR or whether we're going to host more conversations on specific areas that we mentioned tonight. We are hoping to do more of that as we go forward into this year and into the future. Again, want to say thanks to all of our panelists, to Catherine, to Molly, of whom are my partners in arms here. Just appreciate everybody, and please go forward, share this information with other people, get active, be a part of things here, and thank you and good night.